Hello, listeners. This is Kat. Welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This is the continuation of Swallow the Stars. This will be part 43, chapter 43, entitled Quest Rewards. The day after the practical exams, Hitoshi finds himself, for the first time in years, doing something that he actively doesn't want to do. It's nothing bad, just a stupid class-wide shopping trip to the mall, but he would so much rather be bundled up in his bed at home, sipping his mom's weird tea blends while he listens to music and mindlessly scrolls through social media. He's exhausted in a way that aches, mentally and physically. The 4 days of written exams had completely fried his brain, and the practical against Hisashi-san was nearly too much physically. But it had worked out. No matter how loudly Hisashi-san had screamed at them, Jiro had pushed through the pain in her ears, and Hitoshi had pushed through the fog in his brain to come up with a plan. All it had taken, in the end, were a few carefully mimicked words from Hitoshi and a blast of Jiro's heartbeat, and Hisashi-san was handcuffed. The victory didn't give Hitoshi energy, though, just made him want to sleep. And he would have, if he hadn't wandered back into the viewing area to catch the last few minutes of Izuku's and Bakugo's fight against All Might. Needless to say, when Hitoshi had shoved his way into Recovery Girl's office to sit at Izuku's bed, he was immensely satisfied to overhear the end of Recovery Girl's long-winded scolding of All Might. Izuku had been blessedly awake and having a low conversation with Bakugo, and the three of them had all been happy to snicker and roll their eyes as All Might left the room sheepishly rubbing the back of his head. But then Mina got the bright idea to text the Class 1A group chat and announce a shopping trip. Aizawa-san's logical ruse about the kids that failed not getting to go to the summer camp hadn't been too surprising, all things considered, though many of Hitoshi's classmates had been upset about the deceit. Thankfully, Hitoshi passed all of his finals, so he would have been going regardless, and yeah, sure, Hitoshi needs to pick up some shit for the summer camp, but being out in public, surrounded by his loud-as-fuck classmates, is not high on his list of desires right now. Unfortunately, Izuku had wanted to go, and Hitoshi is absolutely whipped for his boyfriend's big green eyes and wide smile, so he's here, just outside the mall, lazily draped over Izuku's back and half asleep, while Izuku keeps up a conversation with Mina and Bakugo. "Look, I'm just saying," Mina says after chewing through a bite of a melon-flavored Kit Kat bar. "Female heroes wouldn't feel so pressured to conform to sexist stereotypes and images if the popularity polls didn't exist." "I'm not fucking arguing with you, Raccoon Eyes," Bakugo says, as close to civil as he can be, which isn't very civil, but Izuku has expressed his assumption that Bakugo's temper is actually quirk-related, and therefore not entirely under his control, and Hitoshi is inclined to believe everything Izuku says at this point, so he wouldn't be surprised. "But it's like that for every daylight hero. You think my fucking costume provides any protection? Think the fuck again." Izuku's shoulders shift, and Hitoshi squints his eyes enough to watch him hold his hands out, palms forward in a peaceful motion. "Hey, come on, this isn't a fight. Men and women both have it bad in daylight and twilight heroics. It's not a gender thing, but I do agree that women have it worse off. Unfortunately, the profession is just as much about aesthetics and media interaction as it is about job competency." Hitoshi grunts and wraps his arms a little tighter around Izuku's shoulders. "Thank God I'm going underground," he mutters, nuzzling into Izuku's unfairly soft hair before closing his eyes and relaxing again. This is as close as he'll get to peace today, and he's going to soak in every second of using his boyfriend as a bed before the rest of the class shows up. "It is kind of weird when you think about it," Mina says, words a little muffled around the candy in her mouth. "Chew your goddamn food before you speak," Bakugo shouts. "Were you raised in a fucking barn?" "Katsuki, come on." Izuku is placating again. It's still weird to hear Bakugo's first name come out of Izuku's mouth, but honestly, Hitoshi's only surprised it didn't happen sooner. Izuku has a way of getting under everyone's skin and turning them into his friends, probably helped by the fact that he only ever goes by his own given name. Maybe Hitoshi should start a betting pool with Aizawa-san and Hisashi-san about how long it'll take before Izuku's on a first-name basis with the entirety of Class 1A. Bakugo lets out a tisk sound from the side of his mouth, but he doesn't say anything further. Hitoshi can hear the smile in Izuku's voice when he speaks next. "Mina, what were you saying?" "Oh!" Her voice gets excited again, and it's easy to picture her nodding her head. "Just that it's strange that the bigger villains who do more damage are often the ones that the daylight heroes face, and yet those are the heroes who wear the least amount of protection. But underground heroes deal with more petty crimes and less quirk-propelled crimes, but it's common for their costumes to be armored." Izuku makes a sound low in his throat that could be assent or could be disagreement. "Well," he says, his left shoulder shifting again as he either moves his hand to tug at his lower lip or to make a gesture in the air. "Aside from the lack of popularity contests for unders, it's common for the villains they fight to have weapons, It makes sense to have slash-proof or stab-resistant gear if you're dealing with a lot of knives. My chest plate and thigh guards are made of something similar to Kevlar as well, because while rare, there are villains who have guns. He shrugs and Hitoshi groans a protest to the movement, and clings tighter, which just makes Izuku laugh and pat his forearm. But you're right, just because daylight heroes don't usually run into villains like that doesn't mean they shouldn't wear armor. We're talking in fucking circles, Bakugo snarls. We all agree that shit's fucked. If all we're gonna do is bitch about it, we should just shut up. Blasty has a point, Mina says, promptly ignoring the threats that rise from Bakugo with the use of his nickname. I'm going to make a formal request to have my costume changed as soon as we get back from the camp. Be the change you want to see and all that. You should send a sample of your asset to the support department, Hitoshi suggests, his voice low and a little muffled since he refuses to lift his cheek off the top of Izuku's head. They'd make your gear for free, and it would be good for you to develop relationships with them before you graduate. Izuku hums, and the hand he has on Hitoshi's arm slides slowly back and forth in a comforting motion. Momo made friends with one of the first years, Hatsume Mei, who's a brilliant inventor, once she got her new costume in. But in your case, Mina, I would suggest a second or a third year, someone with a little more experience on costumes as opposed to support gear, which is Hatsume's specialty. You got your nose in everyone's business, huh, nerd? Bakugo asks, shockingly sounding like he's on the cusp of laughter, despite the curses he's been barking out for the last several minutes. I had a lot of help getting where I am today, Izuku says, leaning back into Hitoshi's weight. From my dad's, from Principal Nezu, and from others. It doesn't feel right to have so much knowledge and so many resources and just keep it all hoarded to myself. Bakugo snorts. What about from me, then? Improvements to my gear, Bakugo clarifies. What would you suggest? For the next several minutes, Izuku details out what he would change about Bakugo's and Mina's costumes, making insightful observations about potential workarounds for their quirks and also taking into account the directions they want to go after graduating. For Bakugo, daylight heroics, and for Mina, twilight heroics. The sound of his voice is the perfect white noise for Hitoshi, and he gets a solid chunk of rest in before the remainder of their class shows up and shakes him from what had been turning out to be a pleasant afternoon nap. But now he has to deal with people, specifically his classmates. Ugh. I hope you guys haven't been waiting here too long, Kirishima says, while Hitoshi pushes himself off of Izuku's back to slowly regain his bearings with all 5 senses. Sight is the worst. It's far too bright. At Kirishima's side are Sero and Kaminari, and behind them, encircled around the bench Izuku, Hitoshi, Bakugo, and Mina have been sitting at, is everyone else, minus Aoyama, Koda, and Shoto. It's a bit unfair that Shoto is leaving Hitoshi to suffer through this trip with only Izuku to act as a buffer, but Hitoshi isn't going to begrudge his friend a chance to visit his mom. Nah, not long, Mina says brightly as she bounces to her feet. Hitoshi shares a look with both Bakugo and Izuku before all 3 of them straighten up as well. How should we split off? I know not everyone needs the same things, but this is a class trip, so we shouldn't just all go our separate ways. She taps her chin with her index finger, casting her eyes over the group of them. I need trail boots, Hitoshi offers. He's already itching to lean against Izuku again to seek out his warmth and stability, but he forces himself to stay upright, under his own strength for the moment. And sunscreen. I just need bug spray, Uraraka says. One by one, all of Hitoshi's classmates list out what they need to buy, and then Izuku, who had been keeping a list on his phone apparently, splits everyone off into groups. Hitoshi gets a good group, Izuku, Bakugo, Kirishima, and himself, so at least he won't feel like braining himself against a wall within the hour. Probably. You're grumpy today, Izuku signs at him, after they've crossed the threshold into the mall. Everything okay? Guilt immediately seeps into Hitoshi's gut, and he grimaces apologetically, eyes dancing away from Izuku before inevitably sliding back. Sorry, he signs. I don't want to bring the mood down, I'm just tired. Izuku shrugs and flashes a quick smile. Hey, it's okay. His hands move quickly, and Hitoshi doesn't miss that he angles his body away from Bakugo in an effort to keep their conversation private. I spent the first month of the school year in a bad mood. We can trade off. Rolling his eyes affectionately, Hitoshi reaches out and ruffles Izuku's hair before pulling him closer to his side, his arm draped casually over Izuku's nearest shoulder. They start in a sporting goods store, browsing products perched on long shelves. Bakugo surprisingly has experience with being outdoors, and he guides most of their purchase decisions. Hitoshi walks away with more than just sunscreen. He actually gets sunblock instead at Bakugo's recommendation, as does Izuku, and Hitoshi can't say he minds. After all, he is not an outdoorsy person, and he doubts this camping trip will turn him into one, so he takes Bakugo's advice and then promptly forgets every piece of information shared. As they approach the shoe store, Izuku slows his pace before coming to a stop, and Hitoshi stops a step later and pivots toward him. Izu, bro, you good? Kirishima asks, and Hitoshi realizes that he and Bakugo have stopped as well. Izuku nods, a bright smile on his face. Yeah, Mina just texted me and said she and Uraraka are at a clothing store down that way. He points while wiggling his phone in his hand. It's going to be hot at camp, and I don't really want to wear long-sleeve shirts the whole time, so I'm thinking about getting some compression sleeves or something similar. Kirishima winces sympathetically. All right, that's cool, man. You could just wear short sleeves, though. No one's going to say anything bad about your scars, bro. You know that, right? I know. Izuku trails off with a shrug. I don't really like looking at them, you know? We get it, Hitoshi says with a soft smile, something he reserves for Izuku exclusively. He steps forward into Izuku's space and presses a quick kiss to his temple, not a fan of excessive public displays of affection, but always willing to make an exception for Izuku. I'll text you when we're done, or you text me. Izuku beams, all discomfort gone. Okay, see you guys soon. He waves at the three of them before walking off as quickly as the crowd allows. Suddenly feeling like he's lost at sea without a raft, Hitoshi sighs and turns back to Kirishima and Bakugo, the former, taking one look at him before laughing loudly. Aw, man, don't give us that face. You like us. With a glare, Hitoshi walks forward, catching up with them before leading the way into the store. Most days, he admits, though he carefully does not say anything about today. He does like them, but they're simply not Izuku, and when he's this tired and averse to people, even 5 minutes away from the soothing presence of his boyfriend is too much. He should be bothered by it, Hitoshi thinks. Before he met Izuku, Hitoshi could go places alone. He often didn't, not seeing a point in leaving the house for activities that are meant to be enjoyed with friends he very much so didn't have. But he could have gone out if he wanted to. Now that he has Izuku, and he has had him for quite a while, it's impossible to imagine mustering the energy to do anything even remotely social without his emotional support extrovert at his side. It's probably a habit he should break before graduation. He can't imagine they'll be seeing much of each other during the first year or so of going pro. Fuck, but he doesn't want to. He'll talk to Izuku about it later and get his opinion. The last thing Hitoshi wants is to convince himself of something that's not a problem, or subconsciously start distancing himself from Izuku and end up doing more harm than good. The shoe store is fairly full, but Bakugo takes over again, guiding Hitoshi and Kirishima to the boot section like he's been there 1,000 times. After spending some time browsing and trying on different styles, Hitoshi's phone chimes and vibrates from his pocket. Curious about who it is, since there's no way Izuku is finished at the clothing store already, he fishes it out and taps on the screen to wake up the device. Did Izuku ditch us to stay with you? Not mad, just confused since he said he was coming. Hitoshi's blood runs cold. No, not again. Not now. Bakugo catches his panic immediately. What? He demands, taking a step toward Hitoshi, arms tense like he's ready for a fight. Behind him, Kirishima looks up at them both, brow dipping down in confusion. Izuku didn't make it to the girls yet, Hitoshi says, already turning around to walk out of the store. He swallows down the panic, threatening to drown him because he can't lose his composure right now. This could be nothing. It could be nothing, and he clings desperately to that slim hope as he scans his eyes up and down the length of the wide hallway. Heart in his throat, and Bakugo at his side, Kirishima's probably somewhere behind them, but damned if Hitoshi's going to turn around to make sure. He takes off in the direction of the clothing store. There are so many people. Too many fucking people, and Izuku is short, so Hitoshi has to slow down and take his time, sweep his eyes carefully over the crowd to track every face and feature he possibly can. Fuck this, Bakugo growls, pulling his phone out. I'm tracking the idiot's phone. Piece of shit better have his tracking app running. Hitoshi barely hears him, caught in the middle of shoving past a cluster of older teenagers, his head whipping around in hopes of catching sight of familiar green hair. He almost misses it. In the corner of his eye, Hitoshi sees wispy black tendrils, and his first thought is Amahaki. His second thought is, how much danger is Izuku in to pull the god all the way out? But it's on the other side of the hall, and Hitoshi is too far away to see properly. Izuku! He shouts, pivoting and moving as fast as he can through the sea of people. Someone screams, and then everyone is screaming, ducking, running around. The sea parts, and Hitoshi gets a clear view of Izuku, eyes wide and trained directly at Hitoshi. His gloves are on, and Amahaki is nowhere in sight. Around his neck is a hand, 3 fingers and a thumb pressed to skin, and that hand leads to the arm, and then the face of Shigaraki. Behind them, the smoky black and purple warp gate is open. Shigaraki takes a step backward, pulling Izuku with him. Bakugo yells something that Hitoshi is too out of it to comprehend. Izuku's hands come up and quickly move through a set of signs, and then, in the span of a single breath, Izuku and Shigaraki and the warp gate are all gone. In the moments after the warp gate closes, when Hitoshi is left staring at an empty space and barely registering the panicked civilians around him, hardly even hearing Bakugo's angry shouting and Kirishima trying to calm him down, the frantic signs Izuku had given to him finally click in his head. The weight of that last message is enough to bring Hitoshi to his knees. "I'm sorry. Thank you for everything." Shota races across the street toward the entrance of the mall, flashing his hero license to get through the police barrier and then bounding up the steps 3 at a time. He spots Tsukuchi off to the side, communicating to other officers on the scene, but it's the small cluster of students still hanging around the entrance that he jogs over to. Some of them are sitting on the raised portion of a flower bed. Others are standing. None of them seem to be moving. "Sensei." Bakugo is the first to spot him and call for him, something tight in his voice that Shota doesn't want to address right now. He knows that he needs to. He knows that he has to reassure these kids his kids, but not right now. Not right this moment. He counts off heads. 3 students had stayed back from the trip today. Izuku had told him that this morning. And in the phone call he'd received from the first hero to arrive on scene, 6 more have already gone home, so he's dealing with 11 students. That's fine. The group here looks about that size, so he counts. 10. A frown tugs at his mouth, and he counts again. Still only 10. One of them is missing, and Shota takes the time to look. Bakugo, Kirishima, Shinso, Uraraka, Ashido, Kaminari, Sero, Asawi, Yagirozu, and Jiro. Fuck. Shit. No. He counts again, trying to swallow down the panic that rises like bile in his throat. He tries to remember the exact words from the hero, the words that summoned him from what was supposed to be a lazy afternoon spent lying on the sofa with the cats. No grading, no preparations for the summer camp left to go over, just a free weekend with a quiet apartment. "Several of your students were involved with a villain attack at the mall. 6 of them have been picked up by their parents already, or are in process of leaving. Your presence is being requested to watch over the rest of them until their parents can arrive, while the investigation occurs." That had been the entire phone call. No details about the attack, no information on why his son isn't here right now. "Sensei." Bakugo tries again, shoving away from Kirishima, who drops the hand on Bakugo's shoulder without protest. That tightness is still in his voice, something that sounds like anger and defeat and frustration all rolled into one. Shota feels an echo of it in his own throat, a lump that forms just above his collarbone and makes swallowing harder. "Where's Izuku?" he asks, trying to keep his voice steady. He succeeds for the most part, but only because he's been doing this for years. Someone needs to be a central pillar of support right now, and he sure as hell isn't going to make it be one of his kids. "Aizawa-san." Shinso's voice is wrecked, and when Shinso finally lifts his head from where it had been practically drooped between his knees, Shota can see the tear stains down his cheeks, the haunted look in his eyes, and the way his bottom lip is cracked and red like he'd been biting it to keep from making noise. But he meets Shota's gaze, and he doesn't break any further. "They took him. Shigaraki and the warp villain. They took Izuku." For a moment, or maybe 100 years, the world stops. Shota's heart stops. His breaths catch in his throat and refuse to move in or out. He can't blink. He can't feel. He can't think. Everything just stops. "What do you mean?" he wants to ask, but it wouldn't do him any good. Shinso wouldn't lie to him about this, and the words had been clear, concise, and said without any doubt to cover them. Izuku is missing from this group of students because he was taken, because the villain Shota and Hisashi had been unable to stop at the USJ, got his grubby fucking hands on their son, and decided to take him like some sort of war prize, or worse. A scream builds in his chest, and he stomps it down with an inhale so deep it hurts. The world starts moving again, sounds rushing back into him. He blinks, and then he steps up to Shinso's side and crouches next to him. There will be a time for rage later, a time for tears and hysterics, but not right now. Not when his students are looking like lost sheep, not when Shinso, his personal student, his protege, in many ways, his son's boyfriend, is looking like this. "Tell me what happened," Shota says. It's not a long story, and Shinso doesn't mince his words. He has never been the type of kid to do that. He's snarky, yes, and annoying at times. But he has always been blunt and honest where others would pull avoidance measures out of their asses. When he stops talking, Shota puts a hand on his shoulder and squeezes. "It's not your fault." Shinso swallows. "I know. It's not your fault." Shota repeats, and his eyes flick to Bakugo's in the moment Shinso looks away from him. Because as much as Bakugo doesn't look like he's beating himself up over this, Shota knows his student well enough by now to recognize his scowl as a mask. I know, Shinso says, but his voice is shaking. Shota grips his shoulder tighter. Shinso, he sighs. Hitoshi, look at me. Startled purple eyes find their way back to Shota's and latch there. It's not your fault. The only time Shota had ever seen Hitoshi cry was right after the kidnapping. Those had been tears of relief, though, a release of tension and stress after a very long and traumatizing ordeal. When Hitoshi breaks down in front of him now, it's nothing but grief. And fuck if Shota doesn't want to cry with him. His son is gone, stolen away by the hands of powerful villains, but he can't cry yet, not yet. So he does the only thing he can. He pulls Hitoshi against him, tucking him carefully against his chest and holding him tight. Somewhere around him, another student starts crying, and then another and another. Shota doesn't have enough arms to hold them all, but Kiyumi-san has plenty of hours in a day to talk to them. That's going to be his first order of business, after he gets Izuku back. Bakugo, unsurprisingly not crying and looking much like he's been sucking on a lemon since long before Shota arrived, crouches down at Shota's side and holds out his phone. Sensei, he starts for the third time, and finally Shota has the wherewithal to listen. When we lost sight of Izuku in the mall, I pulled up the tracking app to find him. He still had his phone on him when we went through the warp gate, but it shut off a few seconds later, so it's not an exact area, but... Shota stares at Bakugo and looks down at the phone, where there's a map and a faint green circle on the screen, and back up at Bakugo. Kid, he says, chokes. That's great. You did good. Can you send me that? Suddenly, saving his son doesn't seem as daunting of a task. Suddenly, the chances of Izuku walking out of this alive go from marginal to exceptional. He hopes so, anyway. Because as much as he wants to take this image and charge in the direction it points him, getting Izuku back from the League of fucking villains isn't something a single man can do, not even when that man is a father on a warpath. No, this is going to take multiple heroes and a solid plan, and even beyond that it'll require investigation and surveillance, because the highlighted area on Bakugo's phone isn't small by any means. It's nearly a whole damn ward. But Shota's going to bring his son home, and no one, not villains, not heroes, not his best friend, not his boss, is going to stop him. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 43 of Swallow the Stars. Chapter 44 will be next. Hope you all are still enjoying, and as always, thank you so much for listening.